Hey!
Oh!
Did you chop down this tree?
No?
Who did it?
What's that?
I think he did it.
An American icon in storytelling, in the days where Dick and Jane were driving children away from reading and towards the television, Dr. Seuss took on the challenge to reel them back in, and in 1957, a famous feline was born. Although he'd published books for children several times before, The Cat in the Hat was the largest and most immediate success. The whimsical pictures and simple words were able to interest children in reading again, and similar successes followed shortly after. But before these famous books were born, Dr. Seuss was an ad man. In the late 20s and early 30s, Seuss had worked with several companies and had an ongoing ad campaign that was famously successful. Through this, he was able to use that money to fund the creation of his first children's books. But in 1940, he started his 7-year children's book writing hiatus to contribute to the war effort, becoming Captain Geisel of the Information and Education Division of the U.S. Army, where he wrote propaganda film over the course of the war.
I just learned a secret. It's a honey. It's a pip. But the enemy is listening, so I'll never let it slip. 'Cause when I learn a secret, boy, I zipper up my lip.
Practically everything you believe in, they have been trained to hate and destroy. They believe they were born to be masters, that we are inferiors.
Stick him up or I'll blow your brains out. What a rifle! Kamerad!
Then in 1947, Seuss was writing children's books again, many of them now having strong political backgrounds. In Horton Hears a Who, published in 1954, an elephant finds a tiny planet filled with tiny people on a tiny clover. Horton vows to protect these people, only to be ridiculed by the other jungle animals who do not have the elephant hearing to be able to recognize the planet. When the other animals threaten to capture Horton, Horton stands by his vow.
Go ahead. Rope me. Cage me. Do whatever you want. But there are people on this speck, and even though you can't hear or see them at all, a person's a person, no matter how small.
Although the phrase has been frequently used by pro-life and the disenfranchised in the United States, Horton Hears a Who was a mixture of Seuss's reactions to his visit to Japan after the end of World War II. Seuss was surveying the effects of the war on the Japanese children and was astounded by their aspirations, which weren't in line with the conformity associated with the fascism that fueled his previous anti-Japan sentiment. This, in combination with seeing severe devastation, explains Seuss's change of heart in regards to the Japanese people. Horton Hears a Who highlighted the importance of the individual, something budding within Japan's youth, but most of all, it was an allegory about the need for the United States to aid post-war Japan. However, this was the most obscure of the hidden meanings in Seuss's books. In fact, the rest are quite blatant in comparison. In 1958, Seuss published Yertle the Turtle, where Yertle, the king turtle of the pond, grows tired of his stone throne and would like to sit higher above the pond. So naturally, he demands that the other turtles stack on top of each other so that he may sit on top of them. He starts to require more and more so that he may go higher and higher. Seuss had made it very clear that this book was about Hitler and his hunger for power. He even said that he originally had a mustache on Yertle, which he later decided to remove as it was too obvious. Next, in 1961, The Sneetches was published. In this story, there were two groups of the same type of creature, the Sneetch. Those who had green stars on their stomachs were seen as superior to those who did not. Then a salesman comes along who offers to put stars on the starless Sneetches, but then the original star-bellied Sneetches became upset that nobody could tell them apart anymore. So the salesman offered to remove their stars to separate them again. Eventually, after constantly switching between taking stars off and putting stars back on in an effort to keep them separate, people couldn't keep track of who was who anymore. Without the status symbol anymore, the Sneetches were forced to live with each other peacefully. Seuss made it known that this was about his opposition to anti-Semitism, and many others have associated the green star with the Star of David. Then in 1971, 2 years after the Ohio River caught on fire due to high levels of pollution, came the Lorax, a story about a man who discovers a forest of trees that can be used to make clothing, and he eventually cuts every last one down, leaving the original lively forest that he had discovered deserted. Seuss said that this message was so clear-cut that it was basically propaganda. Lastly, in 1984, 6 years before his last book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, Seuss published the Butter Battle book, a story about two groups of people, the Ukes and the Zooks, who have separated each other by a wall because one group eats their bread butter side up and the other butter side down. One day a Zook slingshots a Uke, and both sides gradually built larger and more dangerous weapons to hurt one another. An arms race, until eventually they each invented a bomb, and the book ends with a cliffhanger, a Uke and a Zook standing on the wall, both ready to drop the bombs in their hands. Seuss never clearly stated anything about this book, but because it came out in the middle of the Cold War and amongst the paranoia of nuclear weapons, he didn't have to. Seuss was a master of getting these points across to children while keeping their interests in mind. Maybe not the direct political points, but there's still enough moral messages to gain from the books even without the politics, like equality, coexistence, and taking care of the earth. But what is so unique about the work of Dr. Seuss is how he presents the stories, the colors, the creatures, the scenarios, the absurdity. An argument can be made that he was just catering to his audience, being colorful and whimsical for the sake of holding a child's attention long enough to sell his book. But Seuss said himself that his purpose was to use nonsense to awaken the brain cells. Not nonsense to sell, not nonsense to cater to anybody in particular, but nonsense to awaken the brain cells. To think. The man who wrote Seuss's biography, Philip Nell, wrote, "Seuss is a successful example of an artist who, in the tradition of historical avant-garde, tried to shake his audience out of their habits of thought and cause them to rethink their assumptions." This holds true in almost all of Seuss's books. In the fantastic world of Dr. Seuss, the creatures and the scenarios are truly his. The ball is in Seuss's court, and the reader can only listen. You can't make any assumptions on a Sneetch or a Lorax or the Who's on the tiny planet, or you can't seriously or passionately side with either player in the butter battle, so the reader's predispositions are limited here, and the lesson learned is unhindered by assumption. So it shouldn't be much of a surprise that Dr. Seuss has been categorized frequently as a surrealist, since they commonly use this kind of technique. But you might be thinking that this is quite an uncomfortable leap. Surrealist art can sometimes make you feel uncomfortable. confused or scared. So how could we group fun creatures and wacky situations with all of this? So I'd like to pose a question. When you were a child, what kind of assumptions or associations did you have with the world around you? Snakes are mean, homework is bad, vegetables don't taste very good. What about now? Think of the situations that have hurt you. Think of the people that have inspired you. Think of the places that have amazed you, the lessons that were a pain to learn for you. These things that make up you and your opinions and your worldview. Then think of everyone else around you. The infinite combinations. That's quite a different audience than school children. So you grew up, and surrealism, to have its same effect, had to grow up with you. This isn't to say that collecting assumptions is bad. We have a list of safe assumptions we make as we grow and find patterns and repetition. It helps us learn quicker and more efficiently. But if surrealism is to strip you of your assumptions, it has a lot more work to do now. If breaking down the walls of safe assumptions of school children looks like this, then yours might look more like this. Take a look at The Lovers by Renee Magritte. How many ways does it affect you versus how you think it would a child? A child may react negatively to the act of kissing, covering their eyes or shying away. They may associate a sheet over the face with a ghost Halloween costume. Or with the gender-specific attire, they might see mom and dad. However, it doesn't strike a chord with them the same way it does you. You might associate the sheets with kidnapping, hostages, or blackbagging by the government. The color of the walls might catch your attention because black and red are just a peculiar choice for a wall, and you want to know what that means. You may address the possibility that under the veils might be two men or two women. The kissing might hold your attention for the longest because the significance of the veils is so up in the air. Is it an obstacle? Does it signify the frustration that comes with opening up to a person and falling in love, or is it protection? Not giving yourself all the way to another person so you don't lose all of yourself. You've collected more themes in life than a child, and one by one you call them into question. Then what's the purpose of questioning your assumptions? What is the gain from being disoriented? When you're in a place where your current assumptions that you've learned to get through life don't apply anymore, you're vulnerable to learn something new or see something differently, unrestrained. Instead of evaluating something in comparison to what you know, you just take it in. Your wild imagination, which was gradually retired since your necessity for it to solve problems has lessened as you got older, can run rampant once again. This brings to light a new angle on the phrase, a child at heart. Andre Breton, in his Manifestos of Surrealism, said, "The mind which plunges into surrealism relives with glowing excitement the best part of its childhood." And when we hear a child at heart, we think of fighting to get on the swing set at the park even though you're 25, eating Kraft mac and cheese and watching cartoons in your underwear when you get home from work, or being able to instantly delve into a box of Legos at your little sister's doctor's office and build whatever you please. And this is exactly it. This is where surrealism wants to take you, to liberate how you take on the world around you. Not concerned with expectations or limitations or assumptions, just perceiving as you go. And oh, the places you'll go.